Thank you. Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. As members have so far participated in the debate have noted, this is a very important bill, and enforcement provisions in a bill such as this are some of the most important parts of it. If we're going to have effective health and safety provisions and requirements and obligations, then it follows that we need to have effective enforcement requirements as well. So the bill in this part has prohibition notices, improvement notices, non-disturbance notices, all the things, all the paraphernalia you would ordinarily expect in a bill of this type, dealing with this sort of material. What I don't see, and perhaps the Minister, when he takes a call, can answer the question, what in here allows the small business of 6 maybe or a dozen employees to be distinguished from the large corporate employer, or PCBU as it is now to be known, and what guidance is there for the WorkSafe inspectors and WorkSafe staff and the way they are to approach smaller and medium-sized businesses as opposed to the large corporates? And Mr Chairman, I just say, had the Minister tried harder, had the Minister worked harder with parties in Parliament to deal with this issue as it ties back into the setting of obligations and the workplace representation issues, which have been well canvassed and well debated, then it may well be that we would have a more well-rounded approach to enforcement than appears in the legislation at the moment. And it highlights the issue that I think is important to a lot of people, and there's no point in having gilt-edged enforcement procedures, the various notices, being able to resort to the Court of Appeal, giving WorkSafe not only the right to prosecute, but for private citizens or workmates or the union that might be involved in the workplace the right to prosecute, if that is also not based on or has a foundation of good, effective workplace representation. And the problem with some of the enforcement provisions in here, good as they are on paper, they will come to nothing if a WorkSafe inspector going into the workplace dealing with an alleged transgression does not have a starting point, which is the workplace rules themselves, the workplace culture, the representation structures, the people in the workplace involved in health and safety. And to that extent, it may well be that what might otherwise be good enforcement measures, absent provisions about, some guidance about how smaller businesses are to be dealt with, it may well be that they simply are not as effective. And this goes to the heart of the matter. The reason why the Labor Party is so concerned about this legislation is that we've had this opportunity to get the whole package right, to get the obligations right, to get the form of representation and the guidance about workplace culture right, and to get the enforcement provisions right as well. And the sad thing is that without any movement, without any dialogue or further discussion with the Minister and his party, and indeed other parties, we may well end this process, this part of the lawmaking process, and see a bill come back to the third reading that is less adequate, but certainly less effective than it might otherwise have been if a moment was taken to address the issues that clearly the Minister has been trying to address in the last few weeks. It is vital, particularly in those industries that have the worst health and safety track record, those that have the largest number of ACC claims, those where we are seeing the largest number of fatalities, the largest number of serious harm accidents, that we get this stuff right. We get the workplace structures and rules and obligations right, and that we get the enforcement right as well. And there's no point in having the power to give improvement notices, the power for workplace inspectors to come in and give prohibition notices, the power to give non-disturbance notices, the power to go to the district court for enforcement orders. There's no point in having any of that if the underlying foundation for those enforcement provisions is a weak, or as it will invariably be in some workplaces, non-existent workplace structures. And I call upon the Minister once again, while we have the few hours remaining of the committee stages of this bill left, to think very carefully and to see that we can make these improvements if he has a willingness to do so. The last thing we need is a piece of legislation that finishes at the third reading stage with which New Zealand no longer has any confidence. That's not acceptable, and I invite the Minister to tell us how effective these enforcement measures are going to be when we don't get the other provisions in the bill right.
Mr. Chairman.